In this episode, we move into a part of security work that many beginners assume is mostly paperwork, even though it plays a major role in how organizations prove that security is being managed with discipline and consistency. Creating and understanding compliance reports is about showing whether systems, teams, and processes are meeting defined requirements that come from laws, regulations, contracts, standards, or internal policies. That may sound less exciting than analyzing malware or responding to an intrusion, but compliance reporting is often the way an organization demonstrates that it is not just making security promises without evidence. A company may say it takes security seriously, yet a compliance report is where that statement gets tested against actual conditions, actual controls, and actual results. For new learners, the important mindset is that these reports are not meant to exist only for auditors or executives. They are part of the broader security picture because they help organizations understand where expectations are being met, where gaps still exist, and where corrective action is needed before a weakness becomes a larger business problem. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A compliance report is a structured way of showing whether an organization, a system, or a process aligns with a defined set of requirements. Those requirements may come from an outside authority, such as a regulator or customer contract, or from the organization itself through policy and governance expectations. What makes the report different from a general security update is that it is tied to specific criteria rather than broad opinions about whether security feels strong or weak. A compliance report asks questions such as whether required controls are present, whether required actions happened on time, whether documented procedures were followed, and whether evidence exists to support those claims. In simple terms, the report is trying to answer whether the organization is doing what it said it would do, or what it has been told it must do. That is why compliance reporting depends so heavily on clarity and evidence. The report is not supposed to be vague, inspirational, or loosely reassuring. It is supposed to connect expectations with observable facts in a way that can be reviewed, understood, and trusted. One of the most useful distinctions for a beginner is the difference between security and compliance, because the two ideas overlap without being identical. Security is about reducing risk and protecting systems, data, people, and operations from harm. Compliance is about meeting defined obligations and proving that those obligations are being met. An organization can be compliant in some areas and still have serious security weaknesses, especially if it focuses too much on passing checks instead of managing real risk. On the other hand, an organization may have strong practical security in several areas but still be found non-compliant if it cannot show required evidence or if documented processes were not followed. That is why compliance reports matter so much. They do not just measure intention. They measure alignment against specific expectations. A mature security team understands that compliance reporting should support real security rather than replace it. When that balance is handled well, the report becomes more than a pass or fail document. It becomes a way to show discipline, consistency, accountability, and readiness for review by internal and external parties. Compliance reports can exist for many reasons, and the reason behind the report affects how it should be created and how it should be read. Some reports are produced for internal leadership so managers can see whether business units are meeting policy requirements. Some are created to support audits, assessments, or certification activities. Others are required for regulators, customers, partners, or contractual commitments that demand proof of security practices. A report prepared for an internal review may allow more explanation, context, and discussion of improvement efforts. A report meant for an outside party often needs to be more formal, tightly scoped, and clearly tied to the exact control requirements being evaluated. That difference matters because a beginner might assume all compliance reports look alike, but they do not. The intended audience shapes the tone, level of detail, and degree of explanation. A technical team may need to see the operational details behind a failed requirement, while leadership may need to know the business risk, the likely timeline for correction, and whether the gap creates legal, contractual, or reputational exposure for the organization. At the center of any good compliance report is scope, because the report must make clear what was evaluated and what was not. If the scope is fuzzy, the meaning of the results becomes fuzzy as well. A reader needs to know whether the report covers one system, an application environment, a business unit, a set of cloud services, or an entire organization. The time frame also matters, because some requirements involve a point in time while others depend on consistent performance over weeks or months. For example, a control may require that reviews happen regularly, that patches be applied within a certain time window, or that logs be retained for a defined period. If the report does not explain the scope and time frame, a reader may assume broader coverage than actually exists and draw the wrong conclusion about the organization's level of compliance. Strong reporting avoids that problem by telling the reader exactly what population, systems, teams, and time period were examined. That is not a minor formatting detail. It is part of what makes the report fair, accurate, and useful. Evidence is the foundation that gives a compliance report credibility. Without evidence, the report becomes a collection of claims, and claims alone are rarely enough in formal security environments. Evidence can take many forms, including records of completed reviews, documented approvals, system configurations, change histories, ticket activity, training completion records, access review results, or proof that required monitoring took place. The exact type of evidence depends on the requirement being evaluated, but the underlying principle stays the same. A report should not merely say a control exists. It should show why the evaluator believes that statement is true. This matters for both internal and external readers because confidence in the report depends on confidence in the evidence behind it. New analysts sometimes think the report itself is the product, when in reality the report is only the visible summary of deeper validation work. If the evidence is weak, outdated, incomplete, or inconsistent, then even a well-written report can mislead decision makers. Good compliance reporting rests on evidence that is relevant, timely, traceable, and understandable. A strong compliance report also needs a clear connection between each requirement and the result being reported. This is sometimes called mapping, though the exact term may vary by organization. The key idea is simple. The reader should be able to see which control or obligation is being assessed, what standard or rule it relates to, what evidence supports the conclusion, and whether the requirement is being met. Without that connection, reports become frustrating because they tell the reader that problems exist without showing which expectation was not satisfied. That is especially dangerous in larger organizations, where multiple teams may share responsibility for different parts of a process. If a requirement says access reviews must happen every quarter, the report should make that relationship visible instead of merely saying a deficiency exists somewhere in identity oversight. Clear mapping supports accountability, speeds remediation, and helps prevent repeated misunderstandings. It also makes the report much easier to defend during an audit or management review, because the logic behind each conclusion is visible instead of hidden inside the evaluator's private notes or assumptions. Many compliance reports use results that appear simple on the surface, such as compliant, non-compliant, partially compliant, or not applicable. Those labels are useful because they provide a common language, but beginners should be careful not to assume those labels tell the whole story. A control may be marked non-compliant for very different reasons, ranging from a small documentation issue to a serious operational failure that increases the risk of a real security incident. A partially compliant result can also hide important nuance. It may mean the process exists but is not consistently followed, or it may mean most business units perform the control correctly while one area continues to lag behind. That is why interpretation matters. A mature reader does not stop at the label alone. The reader looks for context, impact, recurrence, and trend. Good compliance reporting makes that easier by explaining the nature of the gap rather than relying only on a status word. The label helps summarize the result, but the explanation is what gives the result practical meaning for remediation and decision-making. One common misconception is that compliance reports are only useful when something has gone wrong. In reality, they are just as important when controls are functioning well, because they help demonstrate consistency over time and create a record of due diligence. An organization often needs to show not only that it reacted after a problem appeared, but that it had reasonable processes in place before the problem emerged. Compliance reports help tell that story by documenting performance against expectations. They show whether policies are being translated into action and whether those actions are happening with enough regularity to matter. This kind of reporting also helps organizations spot weak signals before they become formal failures. A control that still technically passes may be trending toward trouble if documentation quality is falling, deadlines are slipping, or ownership is becoming unclear. In that sense, compliance reporting is not just about checking boxes. It can be an early warning function when used thoughtfully. It gives teams a structured way to notice drift, inconsistency, and process weakness before those issues turn into audit findings, contractual disputes, or serious operational gaps. When creating a compliance report, language and presentation matter more than many beginners expect. A report that is technically correct but poorly organized can create confusion, slow remediation, and weaken trust in the security function. Readers should be able to understand what the requirement is, what was examined, what was found, and what the result means without having to decode dense jargon or guess at the writer's assumptions. Plain language helps, especially when the audience includes managers, business stakeholders, or auditors who may not live inside security terminology every day. At the same time, the report should remain precise enough that technical owners know what needs attention. This balance is one of the main skills involved in good reporting. It is not about making the report sound simpler than the truth. It is about making the truth easier to understand. Strong reports also maintain a professional tone that focuses on facts, evidence, and implications rather than blame. That approach helps people engage with the findings constructively instead of becoming defensive or dismissive. Another major part of understanding compliance reports is learning how to read exceptions, compensating controls, and unresolved gaps. Real organizations are rarely perfect, and not every requirement can always be met in the ideal way at the ideal time. Sometimes a system cannot be updated immediately because of operational constraints. Sometimes a process is partially fulfilled through an alternate control that reduces risk in a different way. Sometimes a gap is known, accepted for a limited period, and tracked through an exception process with leadership awareness. A beginner should not assume that every deviation means chaos or neglect. At the same time, exceptions should not be treated casually. A report needs to show when a requirement is unmet, why that condition exists, what interim protections are in place if any, who accepted the exposure, and what timeline or condition governs the path back to compliance. This is where compliance reporting intersects with risk management. The report is not just recording a gap. It is showing whether the organization understands that gap and is managing it responsibly. Metrics and trends add another layer of value because a single reporting cycle rarely tells the whole story. A useful compliance report often benefits from showing whether the organization is improving, stagnating, or slipping over time. That may include changes in the number of failed controls, recurring deficiencies, average time to resolve findings, or the percentage of business units meeting a given requirement. Trend information helps leaders understand whether a gap is isolated or part of a broader pattern. It also helps separate temporary disruption from chronic weakness. For example, a single missed review might reflect a local operational issue, while repeated missed reviews across many teams may indicate understaffing, unclear ownership, or poor process design. Metrics should be handled carefully, however, because numbers can create false comfort if they lack context. A high compliance percentage may sound impressive while still hiding a small number of serious failures in critical areas. Strong reporting uses metrics to support judgment, not replace it. The report should help the reader see movement and meaning rather than simply presenting numbers in isolation. A useful example can make the whole idea more concrete. Imagine a company has a policy requiring privileged account reviews every quarter. A weak compliance report might simply state that the requirement was not met in 2 departments and then move on, leaving readers unsure about the seriousness of the issue, the cause, and the next step. A stronger report would identify the specific requirement, describe the affected scope, explain that evidence of the required review was missing or incomplete, and note whether those departments actually skipped the review or merely failed to document it properly. It would also explain the business implications, such as the increased chance that excessive access remains unnoticed, and it would describe the remediation plan, owner, and expected completion timeline. If a compensating control existed, such as frequent access monitoring, that fact would also be recorded without pretending it fully replaces the missed review. This kind of report helps the organization understand not just that a requirement was missed, but what that miss means, how urgent it is, and how correction will be verified in the future. The most important habit to develop is seeing compliance reports as decision tools rather than static paperwork. They help organizations demonstrate accountability, support audits, guide remediation, and communicate security discipline across technical and non-technical audiences. A good report shows clear scope, ties results to defined requirements, relies on real evidence, explains the meaning of the findings, and gives leaders enough context to decide what needs action now. It also helps technical teams understand ownership, exceptions, and the difference between a small administrative issue and a meaningful control failure. For a new CySA Plus learner, that is the core takeaway to carry forward. Compliance reporting is not separate from security operations because it is one of the ways security work becomes visible, measurable, and governable. When these reports are created carefully and read thoughtfully, they do more than satisfy auditors or reassure executives. They help the organization understand whether its stated security commitments are actually being carried out in practice, and that is a central part of mature cybersecurity.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.